Hello and welcome to AleksTabletops MTG Quick Study Best of 3 Direct Challenge 8. My name is Alex and let's start our 8th Best of 3 match. So let me launch it and ENG. Hopefully everything is right. Yep, it appears like it. In this matchup, our RippyG faced Jax as the part of currently running Undercity Coliseum Community Tournament Round 8. So I guess without further ado, let's just start. Okay, so my black-green Golgari versus opponent's Naya ramp. Pretty awesome deck that we played against. So I faced these decks, like I didn't face these decks before I created this tournament deck. But since then, I faced a lots of decks like this, and this deck is one of the ones that it's actually pretty hard to fight against with a pretty inconsistent deck. And we have a pretty inconsistent deck. So it's not an excuse though, but again, when you face a deck of that caliber, such as Naya Ramp, it's just like, it's truly hard to fight this type of deck because again, opponent has an answer almost for freaking everything. I mean, we can't wait till opponent is going to get to the mono ramp, then opponent is going to put creatures that we're not going to be able to remove, and tokens that we're not going to be able to remove. There's just going to be too many. And usually this deck basically kind of procrastinates the game or prolongates the game as long as possible until a certain mana condition is reached. If board is too filled with creatures, opponent uses lots of mass removal, which deck has more than enough. I'm not going to be able to rebuild multiple times. So again, in this, like, I don't know what type of strategy we should use, especially with this deck, because like if I would play a different deck, I would probably know what type of strategy to use against this one. There is a way, of course, to fight any type of deck in Magic, but to fight this deck it was truly like I didn't even know how to fight it with what I had. I mean, the only thing that could help us like to fight lots of small tokens that usually produced by Trostani, which opponent has, and also opponent has March of the Multitudes, which allows opponent to produce lots of tokens. This is the only card that we have to actually remove it is Ritual of Soot, but again, since Ritual of Soot is a sorcery and the March of the Multitudes is instant, we're never going to be able to use Ritual of Soot, and opponent always going to produce more creatures the longer game will progresses. So again, I basically kind of, I don't know, I felt in a trap right from the beginning. I didn't know how exactly to play with this deck, with my deck, except the deck that I played. I was pretty familiar what opponent will do. I knew how exactly how much opponent needs mana in order to play almost everything that opponent had in his deck. I just didn't have a chance to basically do anything. I mean, if I will procrastinate too much and not going to play creatures in order to save them, and I tried to do that, it's not going to help me. In the end, opponent will just start to plant creatures and kind of slowly press me, and I'm not going to be able to survive. If I'm going to put creatures, opponent has more than enough mass removal to remove all those creatures, like one of them. So again, no matter what I'm going to put in play, it's just not going to work. The only thing that kind of could work probably if, and this is a pretty rare situation that for which I had a pure luck, which I didn't have, is to put lots of creatures, put Tindershoot Dried, hope that opponent is not going to produce, basically not going to draw any mass removal, produce lots of tokens with Tindershoot Dried, basically Saprolings, by having Poison Tip Archer in play, and opponent will have to use mass removal by utilizing Poison Tip Archer ability of basically passively dealing damage every time that creature is going to die. This is kind of one of the ways how I could put the lives opponent has down. But again, since opponent has a couple of Pelaka Worms that basically regain all this life that I potentially could passively deal, like in terms of the damage, And considering the fact that the opponent has lots of creatures with lifelink, it's truly pretty hard to, with this deck, to fight Naya ramp. Again, my opponent basically achieved the same result as I in terms of the win and loss condition, which means that this deck was stopped. Again, this deck is relatively slow. If opponent is not going to have an early removal, such as what opponent is used against us, opponent might not get to a point of actually utilizing big combinations. But since my deck is super unpredictable and super slow, it's actually pretty hard to fight against. I don't know what decks opponents actually fight against that resulted in him losing. I wanted to see that because I truly want to see what those situations were. But either way, it was pretty good. It was a pretty cool game for me personally. It was quite quick. I mean, the first match was kind of a long one, but the second one was like super quick, like probably couple of minutes. I got destroyed pretty quickly. So here again, I'm hesitant in terms of should I continue to play or not, because of course opponent is not going to hesitate to use master removal like Cleansing Nova, even having Pelakal Worm in play, because after dying it's just going to be additional draw, and opponent already got 7 lives out of it. So again, opponent is not going to allow me to produce too many Tendershoot Dryads, or too many Saprolines, and I also kind of made a huge misplay by next turn attacking with Poison Departure. I probably should keep it. I knew that opponent will use Cleansing Nova like the next turn. I doubt that opponent will use Cleansing Nova this turn. It's not that much of a threat yet, but turn after, I 100% sure that opponent is going to use Cleansing Nova, and I still decided for some reason to attack with Poison Departure, and it was kind of a stupid one. So kind of made a weird hasty mistake, which sometimes you are basically making when you feel trapped. And I truly felt trapped with this one because I knew what opponent had. Of course, we have the opportunity to learn the deck of our opponent and basically to prepare for it. I didn't make any changes. Of course, the first match you always have to play with your submitted deck, so I couldn't make any sideboard changes in the first game. But in the second game, I could make changes, but I actually did not. Because why? I mean, my original state of the deck seems more than fine for this version. So again, right here, I kind of want to play Twilight Prophet, but at the same time, I know that opponent is just going to remove all cards next turn, but I still probably will decide to do that regardless, because we need to put something that will force opponents into using Cleansing Nova now than later. So again, I'm 100% sure that next turn opponent is going to use Cleansing Nova, and I'm still for some reason deciding to attack with all available creatures except Tendershoot Dryad, even knowing that opponent is going to kill everyone. So of course, if I wouldn't attack with Poison Departure, I would deal more damage passively to opponent, and maybe opponent might decide not to kill all creatures and instead kill only Poison Departure, for instance, with something. But opponent actually doesn't have anything to kill single creatures, to my knowledge. Opponent already used Benfire to kill one of our Twilight Prophets, I believe, in the early. So yeah, that was quite a big mistake for me personally. It wouldn't change anything though. I mean, Cleansing Nova is Cleansing Nova. Opponent has 2 copies of Cleansing Novas, also 2 stars of extensions. So again, it was definitely a hard one to face in the deck, especially if opponent will get everything that he needs. Opponent didn't have that many creatures. The whole point of this deck is to basically get to a Trostani, get to a Zakama, or get to a March of the Multitudes. These are the 3 kind of the best win conditions of some sort. And Trostani is not necessarily a win condition, it's more like a help for the deck, and kind of it's a pretty good defender to stop opponent from attacking. So it's pretty I don't know how to properly say it. goodly. Pretty well built deck. I don't know if this is the version of the deck that usually kind of played in a tournament. Again, I'm not like that interested in this area of Magic because I don't like competitive play that much. I already talked about it multiple times. I'm more like a casual player. I love to play for fun. I love to create my own personal decks, not necessarily see what's the best out there. So right here it was kind of a weird situation. I decided to return Tendershoot Dryad, and this was the place that basically killed me. Like right now we have a pretty like fine situation, but I don't have enough mana to utilize Ritual of Suit. Opponent casts of course on the turn end, which is again not going to be able to use Ritual of Suit if we would even had mana without returning Tendershoot Dryad, and instead return something with lower mana cost. But it actually didn't matter. Yeah, it wouldn't matter. I still wouldn't be able to utilize it. And of course now opponent is attacking, and it's just not enough to block and protect ourselves. So it's just, come on, -7. And then, yeah. So, and again, as fast as that, so one card basically did the whole game. But in order to get to this card, of course, opponent had to kind of mana ramp stuff and get to a point of utilizing March of the Multitudes. Hopefully I'm reading it right though. Multitudes? Yeah, I guess it actually called like it. Myself, I have only one copy of this card. Put it in my Kudbog deck, Selesnya deck, which is a pretty like budget deck. It's definitely a... Again, one of the things, like, so this is the second match, of course, so I kind of took a little bit more, like pretty safe hand. By the way, in first game we had almost a perfect hand. If we would play against a different deck which didn't have that much of a mass removal, we actually had a chance to win. But since we played against the deck with a lot of mass removal, it wouldn't matter. Like, even if we're going to like have a perfect conditions, we're still probably not going to be able to pull it through. And I'm usually positive in terms of the games. Like, I always waiting for the last minute before quitting, like until I will 100% sure, will be sure that I would not going to survive. So, and with this deck, when every time that you begin the game, you already kind of, I don't know, not necessarily setting yourself for losing, but it's definitely a hard one, because one of the strategies to basically face this deck is to kill it as fast as possible. For this, you have to produce a lot of creatures, and presumably bigger creatures as early as possible. But since opponent has mana ramp, by having only 3 mana, opponent already has 5. So, and already put Tristani as a pretty sick defender, which we're not going to be able to penetrate necessarily in defense. So it's kind of a problem. Like I don't know. It's really a pretty hard one to face this one with this deck, with my deck. Again, I already talked about it multiple times during this tournament that I'm regretting of submitting this version of the deck. This deck actually went through multiple versions. Most of those matches I'm going to upload in like eventually as MTG Quick Study. The actual MTG Quick Study on Tuesdays and on Fridays. There was a lot of kind of matches that I played with the early version of this tournament deck. We focused on discarding first. We focused we mixed things up. Like in the beginning, this deck was built around discarding and around Poison Departure, or just discarding. A little bit later I put 4 Poison Departures and wanted to focus this deck on pure sacrificial thing and passively draining opponent with 4 Poison Departures. But again, it didn't show efficiency, unfortunately. And because of this, I basically kind of decided, again, I was super confused. I played so many matches with multiple versions of this deck that I basically confused myself and created kind of the worst version possible for the tournament. Again, this deck is doing fine in a regular play. It gets 50% of basically wins and losses, basically a 50% win rate. Almost all my decks are in that area. Some of them are better, some of them are a little bit worse, but most of my decks, even the worst ones, are still budget ones are still kind of getting a 50% win rate usually. But again, and this is during a regular play when I'm just playing usually like casually. But once you put those decks into a constructed tournament or basically constructed event for money, no, for gold, for in-game gold, now it becomes much harder because everyone plays a super efficient deck with a lot of crafted cards, and this where I'm starting to basically, yeah, I know what opponent is going to use here. It's pretty obvious. Kind of March of the Multitude is coming. Probably not one of them, and probably two of them, because it will produce a decent amount of creatures, and after that opponents will be able to play another one and produce even more. So yeah, paying 3, tapping 5, double it, and next turn we're basically dying, because even though we have a lot of creatures, we're not going to be able to block 12 of them with +1/+1 that Immortal Sun gave them. So again, I'm fine with losing, but when you just basically getting crushed, it's just sometimes it's weird. You can help it. It's just weird. It's like you're, I don't know. It's like you can do anything here. You just have to win with dignity, but it's just pretty hard to win with dignity. Seriously, -1. Oh, that was a 1. So yeah, that was kind of it. I mean, we won 0 games here, which is pretty understandable with this deck. It wouldn't be easy for us to win with this deck regardless. Again, we won only 1 match in this tournament, and it's still not the end of the tournament. I believe we still have 1 more round before elimination. We will be eliminated regardless. This is not the point, not the topic of the, like, for discussion. We will be eliminated, such as probably all of our opponents, I believe, because it's just not enough to get it to the top 8. But maybe if certain situations will transpire and some of the top opponents will drop for the reasons of not being able to stream or record their matches, or for family issues, or basically some personal life stuff. You never know. Maybe even one of my opponents will get into the top 8, and it's going to be awesome. I'm going to be definitely happy for them, to basically showcase their skills and their decks in a little bit more higher competition than just playing against my weird decks. So either way, one of the reasons, like one of the things that I'm kind of a little bit sad about is the fact that I didn't create a good enough competition for the opponents. Like, I'm fine with every time, like with any amount of competition. Even if I'm losing, I'm still learning. For me, it's completely fine. But one of the things that I hate the most is when I'm not creating a competitive match for opponent. I mean, I don't like competition myself, but I truly like to create a competitive atmosphere for the opponent if opponent seeks one. And because of this, like, since this is a tournament, since this is a competitive atmosphere, most of the people entered this tournament to learn, and I don't believe that people learn anything fighting against my deck, which is one of the kind of saddest thing that I believe, kind of, yeah. And I'm thinking. So the last thing that we're going to do, we're going to quickly analyze, go through the opponent's deck. We're not going to go through our deck. It's super weak. It has a pretty bad mana fix. It has lots of cards that it doesn't need to, like Memorial to Folly. I don't believe that this card is actually working here at all. I already talked about it multiple times in previous recordings. I tried to make this deck all-around deck that will be able to face against token decks, against flyers, against almost everything. Instead of focusing it on some one definitive strategy, I actually put so many strategies out here that could potentially work in multiple situations. But of course, as I said before, multiple times, just repeating myself all over and all over again, the more strategies your deck has, the harder those strategies will be utilized. This is just how things work. even in life. I mean, if you're going to go to spread yourselves too thin, or I don't know how to probably say it, too abroad, I don't know, you're not going to succeed. You have to, like, you only will be successful if you're going to like focus on one certain niche, or at least couple of niches. But if you're going to go all over the place, it's just not going to be efficient at all. This is just the way it works, unfortunately. And again, I kind of just was all over the place. Again, only one copy of each card. Again, as I said before, this deck works more for a singleton format, and I truly like singleton format the best because I kind of usually create in decks that are fit more for the singleton format, and this deck was kind of a little bit of an extension of the singleton format. One of the reasons why I tend to create those type of decks is because I don't have that much of an extended collection. I mean, I don't have like too many copies of the Vampires Naya Elite. I don't have any more copies of Direfleet Prisoner only one. I don't have like all copies of Tendershoot Dryad, which I would have. If I would have those, I would definitely create the deck based on tokens only. I don't have funguses that basically give all saprolinks +1/+1. I still don't have them like truly zero, and I still didn't craft them because I'm spending my wild uncommons on different decks. So again, I basically created too many kind of restrictions personally for myself. I'm building too many decks. I'm spending all my wild cards on multiple decks instead of creating one solid one. And this is the way that I like to play. I like variety. I don't like to play with one deck only. So, but again, if you go into the tournament, you have to enter the tournament with a certain mindset, and I just basically entered the tournament. I entered the tournament with a completely wrong mindset, and because of this, it was kind of unsuccessful. By the way, we need to change the address because now it's not wiki.com, now it's a fandom.com. So yeah, opponent's deck is it has pretty good mana fix. Again, four of these, couple of gates though, which means that opponent might not crafted all possible cards, but still did everything that he could to get to a point of a perfect mana fix. A couple of gates were not going to hurt though, but still, yeah. Two Trostani's, pretty sick. 3 Black Worms, which is cool. 1 Zakama. 2 Gateways, which probably rarely getting utilized, but when they are utilized, it's probably good. It's most of a distraction, I guess. Like when opponent starts to do it, you kind of might be distracted by this gateway. But again, I rarely seen this card utilized that well. It's a pretty hard one to play it properly. So again, this one to ramp, this one to ramp 2, and of course to get additional draws a little bit later. This one to fight against Planeswalkers. If we would get a Planeswalker, at least in one match, they would be kind of completely disabled, which would be a problem for us. So again, one of the win conditions for this deck. Benfire, again, one of the potential win conditions if everything will set right. A lot of mana, killing opponent with the remaining life. So again, mass removal, mana ramp, mass removal, yep, pretty solid deck. Actually, kind of cool. I mean, everything supports 1/2 strategy, so there's not that many strategies as my deck has, but still it creates a lot of variety though in winning, which is pretty cool. Again, I want to create like decks something like this more than these random decks that I created before, and right now I'm actually starting to create better decks than that I created before the tournament. So again, lesson learned. Tournament definitely kind of pushed me to create a little bit more decks, or like find a balance between creating decks that are going to be efficient and at the same time to be, I don't know, faithful to myself in terms of making decisions and creating decks that I truly want to create, not the decks that are going to that cards that are going to put in my deck based on the efficiency. I mean, sometimes I just want to put one certain card in my deck even though I know that it's not super efficient for this deck, but there is a situation when this card is going to play perfectly, and sometimes these decisions, this is something that I want to make, and again, the rest is just finding the balance. Again, opponent has in the second Bitfire, I don't have one guard, which is, I guess, I have only one copy myself, 2 Tyrant, of course, 2 Excellence Bindings, now to the Autumn, pretty awesome Enchantment Destroyer and Artifact Destroyer, Stealaways, and Saddle Brackages. So again, even sideboard actually supports this strategy pretty well, and my craziness is just too much. I mean, my sideboard was basically confused my deck even more. Although, I don't know, I still thought that this deck could get somewhere. Either way, let's just not talk about this deck anymore. Let's just finish on that note. Yep, so thank you for watching. This is sums up this episode. If you like this video, give it a boost and invite your friends for direct challenge. This is important. And if you want more, subscribe and set the bell note. Join us here at AleksTabletops to be a part of MTG Study live sessions. Have a nice day or night, and see you in the next best of 3 direct challenge. And I guess this is going to be our last 9th round, and after this we're going to be eliminated, and we will continue to upload a separate videos for this series of best of 3 matches outside of the Undercity Coliseum community tournament. So unless a weird situation will happen and we're going to be able to play more rounds than just 1 remaining. But ideally, it was planned like 9 rounds only. So see you in the 9th round. Bye.